Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
This is Orthodoxy Live with Father Evan Armatas, a live interactive call-in program where your questions about the Orthodox faith are addressed. Father Evan is the priest at St. Spiridon Greek Orthodox Church in Loveland, Colorado. Call in your question at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Here now is Father Evan.
Well, good evening, and welcome to Orthodoxy Live, your live call-in show about the Orthodox faith, her teachings, and her traditions. I'm your host, Father Evan, and we're streaming to you live here on Ancient Faith Radio. I'm glad you're with us. It's March 23rd, 2025, the third Sunday of Great Lent, the midpoint of the Lenten journey, and the feast that we celebrate today is centered around, on this Sunday of Lent, the cross, sort of the midpoint of the journey. There's attention given by the Church to the destination of Christ's journey to the cross and his death upon it, which liberates humanity. And so the Church lifts up the cross today. It presents it to us for reflection, for consideration. We're invited to come forward during the Sunday morning service and venerate the cross, which means to approach it and give it a kiss and bow before it. And we sing that hymn, "We venerate your cross, O Christ," and we bow before it, and we glorify your holy resurrection, because we recognize that after the cross, 3 days later, comes the resurrection of Christ. And so wish all of you good strength. You're midway through the Lenten journey. We've got fourth and fifth Sunday. And so anyway, I'm glad you're with us tonight. Now, for those of you who are used to joining the show as of late and sort of streaming audio with us, apologize if you're, video with us. I apologize if you're not able to do so. We've had some technical difficulties before the show, and we don't have our video feed up and running, but you can still call in at 1-855-237-2346 if you've got a question for me. That's 1-855-AF-RADIO. You can also email at ask@ancientfaith.com or orthodoxylive@ancientfaith.com. Either one works. And if you are streaming, if you're using YouTube and you're streaming the audio there, or Facebook, we can still take your questions tonight. You just won't see an audio feed, and I apologize about that. Just like I said, we weren't able to get things working tonight, and apologize about that. Now, of course, to listen to this program again or past episodes, you can do that by checking out the Orthodoxy Live podcast. We take the show and edit it and put it up as a podcast. You can subscribe to that show in whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts, and we encourage you to do so and share this program with your friends. So tonight, taking your calls, 1-855-237-2346. If you'd like to join the program, give us a ring or email us, and we will get to your questions. All right, we're going to go out to our first caller tonight, and it is Savannah. Savannah, welcome to the program.
Hi, Father Evan. Thank you for having me.
Hi, you're welcome. Where are you calling from?
Anchorage, Alaska.
Yikes. Oh, my. How is it in Anchorage right now?
It's good. It's starting to be our form of spring. So it's still snowy, but it's in like the 30s and 40s and sunny, and it's getting, summer's in sight.
Okay. What's a winter like in Anchorage?
In Anchorage, it can depend. We get a lot of snow, and our lows are negative 20s, but that's only like maybe January or a couple times a year that we'll have stints in the negative 20s. And otherwise, it's snowy and beautiful, and it is cold, but it's like stunning at the same time, so it makes it okay.
Yeah. So. Where are you from?
I'm from here.
Oh, so that's home.
Yeah, from Anchorage. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm used to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you hear the name Savannah, makes you think of something warm and sunny down south.
I know. I know, yeah. Not the case here.
What's your home parish?
I go to Holy Transfiguration, Greek Orthodox Church.
Oh, so who's your priest?
Father Vasily Hillhouse.
I like Father Vasily.
He's an incredible priest, truly incredible.
He really is.
Yeah.
His sweet wife. Oh, my goodness.
Mm-hmm. And her beautiful voice. Yeah.
Oh, you're so fortunate.
We really are. We're so lucky.
Well, make sure you tell him hi from me, would you?
I will, definitely.
I was supposed to go to Alaska this summer.
This coming summer?
Yeah, I was supposed to come up to the Eagle River Institute in Eagle, Alaska.
Oh, yes.
Eagle River.
Yes.
In August, but it's a really hard time to come because they do their book institute during the fast of the Dormition.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty hard for priests to get away that time of year.
Yes.
And,
So that makes sense.
Yeah, and my third daughter's off to college just that, like the week it starts. And my wife's like, really? You're going to have me move her in by herself? And I was like, yeah. I mean, I'd like to come one of these days. Yes.
So. Yes. Well, we'd love to have you so much.
Yeah. Well, Savannah, what's on your mind tonight?
Yeah. I have just like two questions about kind of married life and children.
Okay.
And I just wanted to preface first, a lot of these questions are more coming from like other things I hear in the Orthodox world. I'm not saying like from my priest in particular, it's just kind of things that I've heard and want some clarification on. One of them being, I struggle a little bit with this idea that in marriage we have to be open to having lots and lots of children and basically as many children as you end up having. And yes, and kind of this idea that like that's what intimacy with your husband is for, and you have to be open to it every time. And I do love, like, I have a child, I want more, but I don't want, like 8 children because for me that's very anxiety inducing. And I know that could be something where, well, maybe I need that many children so that I'll be a better person. But I don't know, to me it almost takes away from intimacy in marriage as well, because it's like if that's it seems like the sole purpose and you have to always be open to that, it's like the beauty of it is hindered a little. And I don't know if it's my sin in thinking that having more than like 3 or 4 children is too much for me. Just your perspective on that. And then my second question being, I have heard too in like times of Lent and, on Wednesdays and Fridays, we're supposed to like fast from intimacy with our partner as well, or like on Saturday before receiving Eucharist Sunday. And I think for that, I question that too, not question, but it's like, if it is such a beautiful thing that God gave us in marriage, it feels almost wrong to say, well, we can't do that because we have to fast from it, I guess.
Yeah.
So those are my kind of questions.
Well, I appreciate it. And I appreciate, Savannah, the courage to ask those questions because they're important. And so often people sort of keep those types of questions hidden, and we shouldn't be worried about asking them openly and discussing them, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
And so thank you for bringing them up. And I don't think you're alone. I know, at least in my experience as a pastor in my parish, that, these are questions I get asked often by women and men in marriage. And sometimes couples come in together and ask these questions. And, of course, there's a perspective in the church that childbearing and child rearing and raising is, of course, a blessing, right? And I know you know that, and I can hear your little one, and I know you're participating in that, right? And so we start with a positive perspective, and we say, hey, to raise a child, to have a child within our marriage is so important. As you've already found out, it creates an environment in which you are asked to step out of yourself, right? And attend to the needs of someone else and put aside your own time and sleep and physical needs, right? And that's hard. And you find out very quickly when you're a parent that, you're pretty selfish.
Yeah.
You're pretty broken.
Yeah.
You're pretty limited. So in that sense, child rearing is salvific. Because like the gospel of today from Mark 8 and the first verse from chapter 9, we know that to live is to die to ourselves, right? And that's what childbearing does, right? So God bless you. You have this beautiful, is it a boy or a girl?
A girl.
Oh, congratulations. What's her name?
Thank you. Hazel. She's 2.
Hazel. Okay, fun. So, amen. And the church does teach that when people come into marriage, they need to be open to starting a family, right? Now, I'm not aware of a number. I don't think the church has ever said, well, you have to have this many.
Yeah.
If you have 1, you have 1. If you have 8, you have 8. And I think sort of setting up a measuring stick, well, if you have 8, you're holier than if you have 1. I don't think that's helpful.
Yeah.
There's so many decisions that go into, and so many things out of our control that go into having a family, right? And so I think placing sort of an outside sort of constraint or metric is dangerous, or can be, right?
Yeah.
Now, it's also true that, when we have a child and we see the sacrifice, and it's a loving sacrifice, but it's a sacrifice, and that's okay, call it that, because there's also certainly joy, right? It's wonderful to raise Hazel. There's joy in it, right? But there's a sacrifice. But if we get to a place in our marriage, I'm kind of giving you parameters. I'm not giving you a direct answer. If we come into our marriage and we have that child and we go, gosh, I really would like to have more time to myself. And I would really like to have more money in my pocket so I could do things I want to do. And there sort of develops this sort of self-centered, self-focused mentality. Then that's something that we have to challenge too, right? So, there's a balance. And I think a little bit of that balance, and you're saying to yourself, yeah, I want to have more children, but I don't think I could have 8 or 9 or 10. That's not the path that God's called me into. And so I think, and this is my perspective and it's my pastoral advice, we need to address the particular circumstance of each family as such, and we can't apply one standard to every family. It wouldn't work. Right? So I think when you're saying, I could see 3, maybe 4 children, I could see where God's calling me to that. I've got 1 now, and perhaps, we'll have a 2nd and see how we're doing, and a 3rd, maybe a 4th, but I don't see myself having 7, 8, 9 kids. It's not for me. Yeah. I think there's not some, again, outside, I've not come across a number in the canons or writings of the church, right?
Yeah.
Is that answering your question?
Yeah, I think it's just more like if you don't do anything to stop from having children, you could have that many, and so it's like, it wrong to kind of be in charge of that a little bit? Do you know what I mean?
I think that the church understands. Yeah, I think the church understands, spacing children, and, doing that appropriately, right? I think you understand what I mean there, right? We don't want to get pregnant and stop a pregnancy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That we know is dangerous for the condition of our salvation. So we don't do that, but we know that we can space children. We can attempt to do so. Right. And, it's not, again, remember in the church, we believe that we work with God. Right. And we don't necessarily, we don't want to control what God does. Right. At the same time, we don't omit our freedom and our will. So I think there's, an opportunity there to listen to God and to listen to our heart and make some decisions. I've never told a couple, you got to get pregnant immediately after having your first child, right? Never told them that.
Yeah.
And I've also not told people that they have to wait, right?
Yeah.
There's that very delicate, important balance between where God is calling you, right? It's sort of like, I don't tell people they should get married or when, right? But I'll respond to where God is calling them as a priest and where they themselves feel called. And so I think, as you're saying, look, I have Hazel. You've obviously waited between Hazel and the next child, right? And your question is, am I doing something wrong? I think if you're listening to God and you and your husband are in good communication and you're keeping things in prayer, then you're going to find the right time. Is that helping?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's a balance of, like, for me, getting back into, like, feeling healthier after having a kid is really important. And, like, maybe we want to go on one more trip or something. So it's that balance of, like, when is it my selfishness and when is it okay to be like, I want my body to feel better before I have the children, or, I guess maybe just being prayerful about that balance and detecting when it's selfishness and when it's, like, kind of abiding in God's will for you.
Yeah. And I think staying in conversation with your priest, and, it's okay for there to be a little bit of a tension, between what you're doing and what God's calling you to do.
Yeah.
Right? So again, there's no exact answer, like you have to do it this way. And I think sometimes it's a little too easy to say, well, once you've started, you just don't stop. But I don't know. That doesn't take into account. Now, some are capable of such a decision, but some aren't.
True.
And so are we as priests supposed to apply one standard to every single situation?
It's not good.
I don't think that's how we should apply it. But, we also know that intimacy within a marriage is also for the couple. Right? It's not just for childbearing, right? That's an understanding of the church. So, like, when you're talking about a fast period, is it possible that there are times where we as a couple decide that we are going to abstain from intimacy, as St. Paul talks about, that we can be more focused on prayer and spiritual growth? Yeah, we can do that. But does it mean that we rigidly hold to abstaining every day that there is a fast? Maybe not, right? Again, there's a balance in there. There are some obvious places where we can make some easy decisions, like, Holy Week. It's probably not a time, maybe even clean week. But in between those spaces and at a certain age, that's probably, as St. Paul says, not possible lest we burn with desire, he says, right? But as you age, that's going to change. So there's a lot of factors in there that impact, right? And we have to be attentive to where our spouse is in this decision. We can't apply a rule arbitrarily or woodenly, may end up harming the relationship, right? So I think it's something we have to be very delicate about. We have to take into account, as you said earlier, that balance between what's my will, what's God's will, and we navigate it, right? And we understand that intimacy in a marriage is beautiful. It is a gift. It's not sinful, right? It's an offering of self to the other. And it's really lovely that we can come together in that way, right? Honorably, beautifully. We pray for the marriage bed, in the services of the church. So, right? Is that helping?
Yeah, I guess just recognizing there's not a hard and fast rule as much as sometimes it seems, or like you said, just kind of situation by situation. Sort of.
Yeah, and look, are there voices that are going to go on the extreme of these questions? Yes. There's going to be people who say, no, every act of intimacy should be directed towards bringing a child into this world. And others are going to say, no, you can use any type of birth control you want. The marriage bed can be utilized for simply your physical enjoyment. Both of those extremes are wrong.
Yeah.
Right? And then others are going to say, absolutely never can you be intimate, on a Saturday or a Wednesday or a Friday or any fast day or during a fasting period. And others are going to say, nah, none of those rules matter. Right? In the extremes, we usually find things that are impossible to apply.
Yeah.
Right. And so, right, we have to navigate this in the golden road, right in the middle. And, I was with the patriarch, the ecumenical patriarch once, and a similar question was asked of him. And he handled the question the same way I am. He said, look, we have to find the right balance for the couple in the space and time of their marriage that's appropriate and right and keeps them in communion with God and one another. And so it's not going to be the same for every couple at every stage of their life, and we have to be a little bit more robust in our response to such questions than, kind of making a hard corner and a hard rule and sort of boxing everybody in. I think, then people don't have room to navigate. Then so everybody's just say, well, I didn't have 8 kids, so somehow I didn't live my marriage correctly within the church. Right? That's a tricky space. So I hope it helped.
Definitely. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for calling, Savannah. And don't forget to tell Father hello from me, okay?
I will. I definitely will. Thank you.
Okay. Good night. Okay. Well, we're going to go back out to the call lines. And if you're listening tonight, you're listening to Orthodoxy Live here on Ancient Faith Radio. It's March 23rd, the third Sunday of Lent, 2025. And we're going to go to our second caller here and take a call from Tim. Tim, welcome to the program.
Hey, Father. How you doing?
Good, good. How are you? Where are you calling from, Tim?
Oh, I'm in northern Ohio.
Oh, well, welcome to the program. It's nice to have you on.
Hey, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I've listened to you for years and years, especially in your early years that you were on. Because I was a very young Orthodox person at that point, and just learned all kinds of things from you. So I can't thank you enough for this program and Ancient Faith Radio, for that matter.
Oh, that's so nice of you to say. Well, it's great to have you on the program.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, tell me what's on your mind.
Well, hey, what I've done since I've become Orthodox, and as I said, listen to so many Ancient Faith Radio programs, I've just really enjoyed talking Orthodoxy, what I call just sort of talking Orthodoxy. And so there'll be occasions with people I'll meet at the church, and they too want to talk Orthodoxy, and for whatever reason, that doesn't exactly happen in coffee hour so much, So what we've kind of done is I've kind of gotten certain people, they say, hey, why don't we just make a telephone appointment and we'll just talk Orthodoxy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of got the idea from Father Andrew Stephen Damick. He said, this is a number of years ago, that we need more spiritual brothers. Spiritual fathers are great, but spiritual brothers are good too, because a lot of times the spiritual fathers, they just don't have the time to give to everyone.
Sure.
If we had more spiritual brothers to talk about things. So I kind of thought, hey, that's a great idea, and I've kind of done that. So
beautiful.
It is. I mean, I enjoy it, and in this particular case, this was I was hooked up with a person who's relatively new to the church, and he became a catechumen, entered into the church, and so we've continued our talks, on a weekly basis. I want to emphasize this is not an internet thing. Okay?
Sure.
We actually talk.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Get it.
Anyhow, what happened was. He's during Lent. He's been reading the Lenten devotion to Saint Ephrem.
Okay.
And as you know, it starts off, "O Master of my life." Let's see if I can see it here.
Take away from me the spirit of laziness, idleness, love of power, and idle talk. Yeah.
And the version that we had, it begins with sloth. Okay.
Yeah, sloth also.
That's the word that we were dealing with. And he is a very hardworking man. I mean, his workplace is really challenging to him, and he's very hardworking. And he felt that sloth was really kind of referring to whether he's really doing as much as he should be doing at his workplace. That was a major part of that sloth. And I said, no, I don't think so. I think this is more kind of dealing with a spiritual sloth. You know, that if we're not really praying on a level that we should be praying, for example, or things along those lines, I thought that was sort of like the primary focus.
Yeah.
So it was a little disagreement, and I said, well, hey, I'll just call Father Evan and see what he has to say about that. And so that's why I'm here.
Well, for those who are listening who are new, let me do a little description and background about this prayer that you've brought up. It is a prayer that is read during the Lenten season in the Orthodox Church. It's a Lenten prayer of Saint Ephrem, and there are 3 stanzas to the prayer. And so there are different translations to the prayer. The one that I think you're probably familiar with, and tell me if this sounds right, begins, "O Lord and Master of my life, take from me the spirit of sloth, despair, lust of power, and idle talk." Does that sound right?
Correct.
Yeah, but give rather the spirit of chastity, humility, patience, and love to thy servant. And then the last stanza, "Yes, O Lord and King, grant me to see my own transgressions and not to judge my brother. For blessed art thou unto the ages of ages. Amen." Sounds familiar? Yeah. So each of those stanzas is usually followed by a great prostration. And so those stanzas are read while one is typically, they're even in the Lenten services. You know, they're found in the Compline, the pre-sanctified liturgy, but also in our personal prayer time, right? So we'll read these prayers. We'll read this prayer standing, and usually at the end of each of those stanzas, we'll drop to our knees and touch our foreheads to the ground, and then arise, making the sign of the cross, right? Again, does that sound familiar to you, Tim?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so this is something that we adopt as a prayer said during the season. And like many things within the church, there's variety, there's seasonality, and the Lenten season has its own rhythms and prayers and almost context and mood, right? You know, we see perhaps in our churches the lighting is dim, the vestments are dark, the hymns are in a minor tone or plain chant, right? Versus, let's say, a Sunday service, which is bright with bells and, has a completely different feel to it, right? And the opportunity there is to sort of enter into this idea of repentance and change. And this prayer was understood in the church to be sort of a beautiful expression of what we hope to correct in our lives, and then what we are pointed toward, right? The spirit of chastity, humility, patience, and love, right? And then like in that last stanza, to see my own transgressions and not judge my brother, right? That's a correct way to approach our own growth. So in that first stanza, I wanted to give that background because I think, there's lots of people who listen to the show who have never even been to an Orthodox church before and may be thrown by that, but I want them to hear about this prayer and incorporate it. And so you can just look it up. If you weren't able to kind of write down those words, you can just look up Lenten Prayer of Saint Ephrem, And Ephraim is spelled different ways, but you can generally get to it by E-P-H-R-A-I-M or R-E-M. It's, like I said, spelled in different ways. But, okay, so Tim, I'm going to say your winner, chicken dinner. That first, the spirit of sloth is generally directed towards the idea of spiritual neglect where my salvation is concerned, right?
Yeah.
And it can apply to the general idea of laziness, right, which can afflict a person living out of obedience and rhythm. But, making one's bed, while important, is not generally understood as leading to the kingdom. It's more just looked at as basic, general, good housekeeping and behavior. But avoiding spiritual disciplines, right? Charity to the poor, holding our tongue, seeking to be forgiven and forgive, being merciful, patient, right? Those are spiritual disciplines that are encapsulated within our prayer, our right belief, our reading of scriptures, our attending of church services, our fasting. And that's what, the prayer is directed towards, right? And in particular, there's a sense within the church that this particular sin, why is it in the first part of the prayer? O Lord and Master of my life, take from me the spirit of sloth. Why is that the first thing? Because the saints, and Saint Ephraim being one of them, knew, well, that particular sort of spiritual barrier will derail one's efforts immediately. You can't sort of get beyond it if you have neglect over your spiritual well-being, and so it's the first part of the prayer, right? It addresses it from the outset. What are we doing? How are we addressing our spiritual well-being? So does that make sense, Tim?
Definitely, and you've shed an extra light on this, that there's sort of a priority here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we're not familiar with today, but was certainly in view in a lot of the writings of the saints, certainly in the Desert Fathers, was this idea of sort of sloth in our, they called it the noonday demon. This sort of listless spiritual behavior that sort of saps us of any spiritual vigor. And it's dangerous. Once sort of people get out of spiritual vigilance and they kind of become slothful about their souls and their eternal condition, game's over. Right? What does the enemy of our soul need to do once we've sort of taken a break from it all and just sort of, stepped back into a sort of lackadaisical attitude about salvation and the condition of our soul and whether or not we might enter the kingdom or not? Right? It's over.
But for sure, I think it's Paul that was said. As I'm paraphrasing, that he didn't want any tepid believers.
Yeah.
He wanted to be on fire. Yeah.
For sure. And we see that for sure within, someone who's new to Christianity. They're often on fire, right? And, then over time that might sort of dissipate. And so, having a lull is natural. That's why this prayer is placed in the Lenten journey, because we are trying to reinvigorate and renew our commitment to Christ and his teachings. And it's natural throughout the year that we sort of start to, maybe we're not paying too much attention anymore, right? And the church knows that, right? That's the human condition. It's like, when you get a new car, maybe you're very careful to, park it away from the rest of the car so it doesn't get a ding, and you clean it, and you do all the maintenance. And then, once the car's 12, 13 years old, who cares, right? That's the way that you would treat that. Well, in a more important way, that's how we can often treat our spiritual life, right? It's something that we discard and don't think seriously about. So, great question, Tim. No one's ever asked that, and no one's ever asked about that prayer. I'm glad.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I was tremendously blessed by is his bringing this up, actually, and our discussion bringing it up made me focus more on that term sloth, and made me look at my own prayer life and say, hey, I think mine is where it's supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly. It's
I
true
was tremendously blessed by his just even pointing this out, and so I thank you, Father. This has been terrific.
That's great to have you on the show, and I hope you call again, and God bless you the rest of the journey. Blessing
upon you too, Father, and your family.
Okay, thank you. All right, good night. Well, again, you're listening to Orthodoxy Live here on Ancient Faith Radio, and if you wanted to get into the program, it's 1-855-237-2346. You can also write in your questions on YouTube or Facebook. Listen, we're going to take a quick break, get a glass of water, and rest my voice for 30 seconds. We'll be right back, and we'll pick up with one of our YouTube questions from Sally.
Orthodoxy Live with Father Evan will be back in a moment. In the meantime, lines are open at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346.
Hi, this is Father Evan Armatas, priest at St. Spiridon Greek Orthodox Church in Loveland, Colorado, and the host of the Ancient Faith Radio Sunday night call-in show, Orthodoxy Live. I am pleased to announce today the release of my first book for Ancient Faith Publishing, titled Toolkit for Spiritual Growth, a practical guide to prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. It seeks to provide a guide to the three basic and primary disciplines of Orthodox spirituality. Through these disciplines, Christ opened for us a path that frees us from the disordered way of life that has become normal for many, even though their hearts and minds tell them otherwise. Please join me in exploring the three-legged stool of Orthodox spiritual practice, prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Books now available at store.ancientfaith.com. And the title, once again, is Toolkit for Spiritual Growth. I look forward to sharing it with you. God bless.
Father Evan is ready for your call, and our lines are open at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Here once again is Father Evan.
Well, thanks. Welcome back. And one of our listeners has written in using YouTube to do so, and her name's Sally, and Sally writes, what would you say to someone who is a catechumen but says he can't do without meat or eggs because he works out and doesn't think it is healthy to do without them? Well, Sally, thanks for that question. It's probably helpful for me once again to sort of say a bit here, because some people may not be familiar, or even if you have grown up within the church, it's good to sort of step back a moment and understand what's going on within the fast of the church. So it is traditional, and it is encouraged during the fast that we eat a vegetarian diet. And so that would mean that we're not eating animal products. And so, that means red meat and poultry, white meats. It includes dairy, eggs, milk, cheeses, yogurt, cottage cheese, butter. It also means we're abstaining from alcohol for most of the Lenten, the days in Lent. It's a pretty simple diet, right? It can be carb heavy because, people will eat grains and fruits and vegetables, things like rice and potatoes and pasta, let's say, nuts and breads, lentils, beans, which are a little more higher in fiber and protein. And so, it's pretty rigorous. It's pretty demanding. I think more and more is sort of maybe how we deal with food in the West and sort of the way we've limited and understand eating and diets. It can be hard for people. At the same time, while the church prescribes and encourages the fast, we don't have religious police, and we're not policing people. We're not looking onto other people's plates and determining whether or not they're doing it right or wrong. Right? Now, when someone is entering into the church and they're learning about the fasts and they're sort of joining in the communal fasts of the church and making decisions about their own diet, they may feel that there are certain, restrictions that are too difficult for them to meet. Now, that's a pastoral question. The church doesn't say, well, then you can't be in the church. If you can't keep the fast as prescribed, you can't be a Christian. No, the church has never said that. But the church encourages someone to take up the fast. And then that person needs to speak with their local priest, and work out a plan. So, you're saying this person says, well, I can't do without meat or eggs because I work out and it wouldn't be healthy for me to live without those food items. So perhaps they sit down with their priest and say, all right, I feel like I can't do this. And so we find a pathway for them. This doesn't mean we put away what is taught by the church, that, to be in a vegetarian diet is the goal, right? But we might have to make some decisions, right, in conversation that change that diet a bit. So, that can be anything from, well, there's lots of protein sources in vegetables, but perhaps that's not something they can do. And so we add in things like plain chicken breasts, or plain yogurt or cottage cheese. It's not ideal, but again, we aren't legalistic in the church, and perhaps they have to take up other things. That, I have people who write into me all the time that say, Father, I need to talk about this Lenten season and how I'm going to fast. And I'm asking that I could eat, proteins, animal proteins. And so then we talk about other things they can do to participate in the fast and keep themselves, if you will, in the spirit of the fast and in the rhythm of the church, so that they don't feel excluded. Now, eventually, can someone move towards that vegetarian diet or move toward it, on more days than previously they were, in years past? Yeah. I think we don't want to reduce the fast as simply, well, I gave up chocolate. That's not the spirit of the fast either, right? So I would address it pastorally. You're asking me what would I do? I would sit down and I would work with them, and try to find a path forward so they can participate, and over the years, maybe participate to a greater level. So, Sally, thanks for the question. Again, if you didn't join us at the beginning of tonight's program, I mentioned that due to kind of technical difficulties, we weren't able to get the video working tonight, and so we're not streaming on YouTube tonight. But as Sally just demonstrated, you can still get to us by using the chat box in YouTube or Facebook to ask your question, and you can still call in at 1-855-237-2346. So here is another YouTube question. The question is, I'm just looking at it now. It says Nicterinos. I think is how the name is pronounced. Some address God as both the origin and purpose of the universe. But wouldn't that make God's predicates contingent on creation? That's a rather complicated phrase, isn't it there? Listen, when we speak about God as the origin of the universe, yes, that is certainly what we say as Christians, that God is the origin of all creation. You know, he set creation and the universe into existence and being. This was an act of his love, right? And when we say the purpose of the universe, you know, that phrasing, I think is a little bit, you know, in my understanding, clunky and off. It's not as if God set the universe in motion so that the universe could adore and worship God. That's not quite how we would speak about it. Rather, we would say that God set the universe or created the universe in order that the universe could be in relationship with God. Now, in saying that, we're on a much safer platform to talk about creation and what it means. You know, in other words, I didn't have a child because I needed that child to sort of worship me as its parent. I had a child out of love for my wife, that sort of went outside the bounds of our relationship towards the idea of procreation, right? And co-creating with God, another human being. And my hope in creating and co-creating with God, you know, the 4 children that I have, is that we can enter into relationship. And we see that, you know, God serves his creation. It says he even humbles himself to the point of being placed upon a cross. You know, God's not sort of sitting up on a stool, looking up on his creation and saying to all, worship me, adore me. But we do worship God. We do adore God. We do give God honor because of God's great love and mercy, right? Is he do it in his perfect holiness? Well, yeah, we could argue that point. But it would be, I think, incorrect to say that God's purpose in creating was that we would worship him. You know, no, God's purpose was that we would be in relationship with him. Now that sets up a whole different thing to consider, you know, and the dynamic of love, right, that exists between each of us and our Creator, right? So anyway, all right, we've got another question that's come in from Facebook, and this comes in from Lillian. She writes in, Dear Sir, I was listening to one of your previous radio broadcasts, and I heard the phrase, the Mother of God. From my perspective, God has no mother. He is the Alpha and Omega and the creator of all there is. She is the mother of Jesus, Christ, who is the Son of Man, God and divine at the same time. You know, it can be confusing to hear that phrase, the Mother of God, used. We certainly, in using that phrase, are not insinuating that before God existed, there was Mary, and Mary gave birth to the Creator, who is Alpha and Omega. No, the phrase Mother of God is a phrase used and a phrase sanctioned by the church to protect exactly what you say at the end, that Jesus Christ is both divine and human at the same time. The purpose for that phrase was to dispel many different variations of the same sort of heresy, that Jesus Christ was born simply human and later became divinized, right? Or that he grew into his divinity, and that later in his life, the divinity left him even when he was on the cross and only the man Jesus died. What we're saying by saying Theotokos, we translate it as Mother of God, Miter tou Theou, but Theotokos means God bearer. And that's a term we must defend. Mary was the bearer of God. She gave birth to Jesus, who is God and man, the God-man, the Theanthropos. And so it's a technical term. It's important to use it. It's important to understand why it's used. We are defending against any notion that Jesus Christ was not both fully God and fully man. From the moment the Holy Spirit entered into Mary's womb, right? And all the way until this very moment, right? That Jesus Christ is both God and man, fully God and fully man, right? His nature is both human and divine, right? And we defend that, right? We defend that, and it's important to defend it. Another question that's come in from Facebook. Father, I hope you're well. God bless you. A friend of mine just told me that my King James Bible from the 1960s is not the same as the Orthodox Study Bible. I was surprised. She said that changes had been made to the particular version that I've been reading. And to tell you the truth, I feel a bit shocked. I want to follow the early church scriptures. What can I do? Being a widow, I'm not very good with online things. Kindest regards. God bless you all. Well, the particular edition of the Bible that you have, I couldn't say, is it a complete text of the New Testament? But any modern publication, New King James, NASB, the Living Word, ESV, they are going to be a complete publication of the 27 books of the New Testament. The Orthodox Study Bible for the New Testament uses the New King James Version, which is all 27 books. And within the notes that are provided, you can see notations about manuscript use. And, it's acceptable to be used. It's a complete use of the manuscripts. Yes, are there going to be challenges when it comes to understanding word choice and word use and translation? That's always going to be the case when we're translating from the original Greek. The Old Testament in the Orthodox Study Bible is translated from the Greek Septuagint, and that's unique to the OSB. And included in the Orthodox Study Bible are books that, generally speaking, in Protestant circles, are not included in the canon of the Old Testament. But in terms of what to do, if you are at a bookstore and you're picking up a Bible, I do recommend the Orthodox Study Bible. I think it's a very helpful resource. There's lots of notes and commentary within the text that is very helpful if you're studying scripture. But if you're at your local bookstore and you want to pick up, a New King James Version or NASB or anything like that, I think you'll be fine. You will find differences in the Old Testament and what you pick up, let's say, at a Barnes and Noble, and some of the books that will be found in the Orthodox Study Bible. So anyway, well, listen, thanks for tuning in tonight. Thanks for being patient with us as we struggled through some technical difficulties tonight. We weren't able to stream video tonight, but nonetheless, I wish all of you continued good strength this Lenten season as we've reached the midpoint. For Orthodoxy Live and Ancient Faith Radio, I'm Father Evan. Good night and God bless.